So, Devani, it's good to chat.
Yeah.
Um, we're talking about security today, and I think Microsoft specifically. And it's I think if we think back like 5 6 years ago, when people look at Microsoft,
Yeah.
it's end user computing, servers, infrastructure to a degree, but it just feels a little bit like overnight, Microsoft have completely positioned themselves, but also the way the market sees them, and they're really driving the security sort of approach now. And if you look, looking at Gartner and some of those sort of publications, Microsoft are right up there in the top right hand corner as a security vendor, and it's not necessarily what people even today think of Microsoft as.
Yeah.
It would be good to understand sort of your views, experience, and what do you think of that change, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. And I think really when you actually look at the Defender portal now compared to what it was, 5 years ago, it's a massive shift in terms of the security tools Microsoft are making available throughout the Microsoft ecosystem. When you look at different, when you break it down into, I guess, a technology layer in terms of identity, data and collaboration, endpoint security, they've definitely upped their game in terms of, all of these tools are now being built in. And when you break your business down in terms of that layer of, identity and everything, there is a security tool now that's specifically geared towards protecting each layer of your technology ecosystem. So I think there's been, yeah, definitely.
And it totally makes sense, right? Mike, as we said, from where Microsoft has come from, they're ingrained. If you're a Microsoft house, which let's be honest, this day and age, most enterprises are, they're ingrained in every single layer in that portfolio.
Yes.
Whether it be your Active Directory, your Entra ID, right through to desktop, server, and now the various sort of cloud 365 services as well. So embedding security in there natively
Mhm.
is a massive advantage for the consumer. But I still think it's hard to break some of those old perceptions. And,
Yeah.
we have conversations, and I'm sure you've had this many a times in workshops where clients are, I'm looking at a DLP solution. So I'm looking at this company, this company, this company.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, you're an E5
Yeah.
licensing and all your data's in SharePoint and you're using it. Why are you not looking at the Microsoft solution? And then kind of the penny drops
Yeah.
and we go down that sort of road. And I think, are you seeing that? And why do you think people's first sort of reaction or view is to look outside of Microsoft? Is it that they're just not thinking about it, or people still don't associate Microsoft as a security vendor?
I think so. I think that's primarily one of them is they don't associate them as a security vendor. So when you identify a gap in, security gap in your IT estate, it's never really what license entitlement I have on the security side can I fill that gap with? It's always, what products can we go out and find where actually if you take a look back and look at maybe your licensing, you might already have that covered in part of your license system or your license entitlement already. So I think that's it. I think it's 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 the general of Microsoft not being a security, the people's general take on it is that Microsoft is not security first, I should say.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's changing, and you can see with all the technology development from Microsoft that that's definitely changed within the last couple of years, and I think that's where everyone's opinion will so slowly start shifting to see actually, well, rather than doing a proof of concept with a different vendor tool, actually let's have a look to see what is actually already covered in our license entitlement or what security tools Microsoft have already. So I think it's just people getting onto that adoption.
No, I agree. And I'm going to be a bit controversial here.
Yeah.
Obviously, I started my career a long, long, long time ago, and was focused on end user computing. And I think over time, as you naturally branch into security,
Yeah.
it was just a real eye opener. I mean, the security market for me, I very much struggle with. It's very different to the other markets in our sector. I do feel an element of it is capitalizing on fear mongering,
Yes.
and there's just so many products out there. And you have organizations that, whether it be legislation, regulation, they need to have a answer for these requirements. And it just feels like for a lot of people it is a tick box type exercise. And then you have these vendors out there that are saying, buy our product, it ticks this box,
Yeah.
or if you don't buy our product, X, Y, and Z is going to
Yeah. Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Um, and I just feel people are falling into that trap, and there's just not really a consultancy led approach. We coming from end user compute background have always been, let's look at the requirements, let's go back to basics, let's take a bit more of a pragmatic view on this, rather than the scattergun approach of we're going to buy all of these products. And when we were looking at what vendors to back, and working with the distributors that we work with, we've been presented with 30, 40 different security products from
Yes.
completely different vendors. None of them integrate with each other. They're eye-wateringly expensive. And it's like, surely there's got to be a better way. And I think kind of that's where Microsoft is sort of exploiting that that gap in the market.
I 100% agree. I think that's where, as we say, look, when you look at the technology trend for the last, 5 or 6 years ago, you know, when looking for an AV tool, there's always these different options where Microsoft hasn't filled that gap yet. Now I think they've pretty much filled that gap for everyone who's actually well inside of the Microsoft ecosystem. And I think this is what they've done really well now is in terms of you have all these different security tools, but the way how Microsoft has integrated them so well into a one single plane platform, it makes it really difficult for other vendors to try and match that because you now have a single plane within Defender XDR where you have Sentinel that's very well integrated right now. You have all of the other XDR tools, endpoint protection, cloud apps protection, Defender for cloud, all of the security tools in one plane of glass, well integrated, all sharing information with each other to detect and stop that threat vector. Where before you have to have connectors into different tools, you might have to have a seam solution where you're feeding information from different security vendor APIs and having that information pushed in. And then you have the issue where, you know, there isn't maybe an API available for some vendors. Microsoft has done that really well now, where everything's neatly integrated, and you bolt that in with Sentinel, which is now completely a part of the Defender platform. It's difficult to kind of, to see once you've adopted that Microsoft security ecosystem, how what other tools you can move out of that, right? It's well integrated completely across the estate. Yeah.
And I think that's the key piece, because these modern attacks, Microsoft always talk about the notion of lateral movement.
Yes.
You're going to have somebody that's going to infiltrate, either it's from an email or an exploitation or a brute force, but once they're in, they're going to do that, and they're going to cover as much as possible. And some of these legacy tools, especially when there's no integration, yes, they might alert. They might
Mhm.
tell you someone's breached here, or there's a vulnerability, or something you need to look at
Yeah.
on this side. But you're relying on people, and
Yeah.
these, certainly the legacy SIEM solutions, just generate so many alerts. And it's fine if you're a large enterprise and you've got a dedicated security team or an outsourced SOC, but you
Yeah.
need manpower, you need people looking at it. But not only do you need people looking at it, you need the knowledge on how to remediate it. And
Yes.
that brings me, I guess, to my next point. where I think it's been a long-standing challenge in the security market is that you have security people and they're really good at what they do and they
Yeah.
understand security, but they're not infrastructure.
Yes.
So, yes, I can tell you there's a breach. I can tell you what happened, how they got in, forensics, all of that. But actually, who's going to fix it?
Yeah.
Is it your internal IT team? Is it your MSP? We're now, the clock's going forward and forward and forward. And from the moment you had a breach to the moment you've actually found the exchange guy or the server guy or
Yeah.
the storage guy
Yes.
to look at it,
It's
it's probably game over.
yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, it's probably worth talking a little bit about. That's the beauty of the integration of the Microsoft security stack is not only can it detect, it can remediate, and if it can't, or if you still want human intervention, your team are used to using these tools. They're using Intune, they're using Entra. It's second nature. They're just being prompted and told where they need to look and where the problems come from.
Yeah. No, I agree. Um, it's especially with regarding Microsoft and how they have, well integrated Seam Sentinel now into the actual Defender XDR platform. As you say, in terms of lateral movement, by having all those, being well inside the Microsoft ecosystem with those security tools, and if you look at it at a layered approach, it always, starts off via email or vulnerability system. But as that threat comes in, you have all the information around that threat, what device it came from, what user it came from. You have one pane of glass where you can look at the device vulnerabilities, a risk score that's been tied to the device, rather than, having to go to a different dashboard to see a particular set of information, or, it's all in one single pane dashboard. And then you have the beauty of it being well integrated in a SIEM solution such as Sentinel, which comes in with the powerful part of it is the automated playbooks. So as alert come in, as you say, that time it takes for someone to look into it, find the relevant department team. We're talking seconds here how fast a thread can spread. And one of the great things about Sentinel now within Defender, you have a playbook action that can now do things like isolate a machine, where it's a full isolate, completely isolates it from the network, or a soft isolate where it isolates it only to Microsoft Command and Control, where an engineer can then come in and do an investigation with the device being completely isolated, but from the Defender dashboard, they can still run things like a malware scan, um, do remediation actions, have a remote command control to the device. So, but all of that kind of narrows the time down to where you can have playbooks that isolate a device. You can get the right team in, investigate, and remediate, or follow your security runbook guide. So yeah, I think that's definitely it's good to see that that's kind of in the platform at the moment.
And I think that, again, back to it's integrated into the operating system. These are not additional tools, agents, and I'm sure you of all people have had numerous headaches, especially when we're doing AVD deployments or Citrix deployments, where customers got 6 or 7 different security tools, and
Yeah.
again, it's what impact does that have on the end user experience, and just the footprint of all of those tools on the operating system, and the performance degradation of that, not to mention application compatibility issues, and it just adds such an overhead.
Yeah, no, it's a massive impact depending on, the security tools that are, baked into the image, it massively affects performance. And I think with, Defender for Endpoint, it it's built into the OS. So you get all of that, tools and capabilities directly without having to install any agent or layering multiple tools, which, consume CPU, memory, resources, IOPS. So yeah, no, it's yeah,
And I think let's be honest, Microsoft want you to be so tightly integrated to their ecosystem that
yes,
it's very difficult for you to leave, right? Once you're in, it's difficult to get out, and I get that. But at the same time, they've done a really good job at sort of closing the door on some of the other options. So, for example, we're doing a lot moving customers to Azure. Once you're in Azure, the next step is, well, I'm going to start looking at PaaS services,
Yeah.
SQL, Azure Files. These are all great as a service solutions. Then I've looked at my third party SIEM solution and it's like, well, that can't really talk to
No.
Azure Files. It can't pull logging information from SQL PaaS, funnily enough, because it's a Microsoft service. So what do you do then? You either have a gaping hole in your coverage, or you still have to implement Sentinel and then
Yeah.
ship that additional logging information into
Elsewhere.
your third party SIEM. So in any case, Microsoft have kind of got you. But at
Yeah.
that point, just from a commercial standpoint, it makes sense to consolidate your tooling. And this is something I know you and the team have been doing a lot with our customers.
Yeah.
It's just sitting down and doing those periodic reviews of, here's your E3 or E5 suite. Here's all the components, which, let's face it, are constantly evolving and changing,
Yeah.
and helping the customers on that journey to where it makes sense, move technology from a third party tool
Yeah.
into into the Microsoft stack. Now, look, I'm not a complete Microsoft fanboy here. I'm gonna say be all and end all, because
Yeah.
there are products that do things better or de-risk, um, and that's where the consultative approach comes in. It's not just pushing products here. It's where does it make sense? Mimecast, for example, awesome product, lots of great value add there, and yes, Microsoft can do a lot of it. Does it do it as well as Mimecast? In certain scenarios, not necessarily. So doing right for the customer, but with that view on integrated ecosystem, like you say, and consolidation.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the approach is rather than looking for, going out and researching multiple tools, I think the first approach would be to, look at what your license entitlement is and to see what tools that or products that you have already within the Microsoft ecosystem that can achieve that and pilot and demo it and see how it works. Does it fit in your system before then just the approach of finding out, what the best next tool is that's being propped up on Reddit or, that whatever's being advertised currently at the moment in time, there is likely a solution that fits well into your ecosystem. But without having that strategic approach where you're looking to fit in an ecosystem, then you're always going to be having multiple tools. So it's going to be an approach where you decide to say, look, as you say, you look at your current license entitlement and see what you're entitled to, and you build upon that, and you take it in a layered approach to then see, okay, maybe what license can you get next to kind of cover a gap in that layered approach. And I'm going on about the layered approach, but I really like it when you break down your environment in layer from identity, data, um, network, and your PaaS services. It gives you a clear way to look at a framework of how can I protect my identity? How can I protect my data? How can I protect my endpoint? And then what's next after something happens? Where is that information being fed into? So yeah, I think that's definitely it. It's about taking a strategic approach to security overall and the actual IT estate. Yeah.
And I think, look, modern day computing, yes, it was accelerated from COVID, and obviously the big switch to remote working, but
Mhm.
yeah, IT infrastructure is different now. It's zero trust. It's SaaS.
Yeah.
We don't really have this notion of protecting the front door anymore. It's
Yeah.
actually contextual based access, giving
Yes.
people access to what they can depending on their device, where they are, etc. So
Mhm.
you need that integration. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with gaps.
Yes. And I think it's really depends on the size of the business. I think larger organization may tend to like explore different tools based on what they do. But I think for the smaller, let's say less than 100 user business, it makes sense to have that Microsoft, especially if you're in the Microsoft estate already, to have that well knit integrated system because it's a lot less noise, it's a lot less of technical skills of people who you need to have. you have someone who's already familiar with the Microsoft security stack and the Microsoft tools in itself, it's a very much easier, technology to adapt from your team. It's not less of you don't have to be trained and maintain certification on a lot of different tools. You have, Microsoft, what you can focus on.
And I think, look, again, we're going back to talking about lots of products. There are lots of products, and I think it's important to reinforce the point that we're not saying don't look at other products. What we're saying is focus on what's available first, and then make a business decision on what you need, where the shortfalls are, and whether we need to jump out and find a third party tool. Um, and I think, look, that's where the benefit of working with a partner is, because yes, we are a Microsoft partner, but we also have relationships with a lot of other vendors, and we're not, as I said from the beginning, we're not here to push the Microsoft products because for the most part, you've already paid for them. They're in your
Yeah. Yeah,
ecosystem.
exactly. Exactly.
Our job is to help you as a client understand where the shortfalls are or where there are gaps because you have a requirement, whether that's regulatory, technical, and it's either can we overcome those gaps with what you have or do we
Yeah.
need to plug something in. But what's really important is if we are plugging something in, that we're really strict with the criteria that that must follow. Does it integrate, with
Yes.
Entra? Can we plug it into Sentinel? Because again, we find this not so much on the security side, but you know, organizations, now with SaaS, lots of departments are just going out and buying their own products,
Yeah.
which is great because they know for their workload what is the best product to get. IT are, involved on the periphery. The problem you have with that is that there's not always a strategy. So a product's been bought, yes, it's a fantastic marketing tool,
Yeah.
but it doesn't integrate with Entra. There's no SSO. We then
Yeah.
can't put conditional access on it. So again, it's holistically as an organization, have a strategy, try and align it for consolidation and integration, but still allow that flexibility as long as it fits within the parameters. Because we don't want to then buy something that breaks something or, we then have a manual process.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's really about assessing what you have, and this is what we're trying to say, where it's not, kicking down any other tools. It's really just about assessing what you have already and what you're entitled to, rather than being sold something different, which it could already be covered with what you have. And if it's, as you say, if it doesn't meet the criteria, then within the Microsoft tool itself, then you can kind of say, okay, let's look for other tools that can fill that gap, but also meet the requirements of, as we say, it integrate well with the current ecosystem we have.
And look, let's be frank, right? Throwing money at security does not make you any more secure.
No.
Back in the days, yeah, you had the best firewalls, you had X, Y, and Z, but it's just not the case anymore. I mean, you look in the media, all of these organizations that are, getting hacked, having data stolen,
Yeah.
these are not small businesses. These are huge businesses with humongous IT budgets. They are buying the best of the best.
Mhm.
And it's, we need a change in mind shift that, absolutely we need the measures, the tools, everything in place.
Yeah.
But equally as important to lock in the front door is how you recover.
Yes.
Because that is the biggest challenge here. You have a crypto lock type attack, for example. If
Mhm.
you should be focusing on covering from that because it's happened,
Yeah.
so you can't turn the clock back.
No,
You're not
no.
going to pay the ransom. So making sure you've got robust processes, backups, DR, and you test them on a regular basis for these different scenarios, so that when the inevitable, and let's be honest, it is inevitable
Yeah.
for most organizations in one form or another, there will be a breach, whether it's low level email or single user's password or right through to something more severe. You need to be prepared for that as a business. Absolutely the security side is in parallel with that. But I just think organizations, certainly the larger enterprises, are more focused on throwing money at
Yeah.
security without accepting that this could happen. And this could happen, not necessarily on your own infrastructure. A lot of the things we see in the media, British Airways, Co-op, some of these, big brands, it's not even been their fault. It's been somewhere in the supply
No.
chain, whether a supplier or a third party platform that's been infiltrated. So, you focus on your supplier security stance as well as your own, because it's all well and good keeping everything locked up on your
Exactly.
side. But then if you're using a third party payment system and it's got gaping holes everywhere, ultimately the brand reputation comes back to you.
Yeah. I think, yeah, you're right. It needs to be looked at from not just only from a tooling perspective, but from a strategic perspective in terms of assessing your suppliers and making sure, when you do onboard a supplier, you have a framework that they should be essentially conforming to as well. So maybe they meeting certain cyber essentials criteria before you even look at doing business with a certain vendor.
Asked to see their pen tests, all that kind of stuff. And it's not unreasonable to be asking for this information.
In today's age, yeah, definitely. I think it should be a part of any business's the way how they do business, especially when it comes to technologies and third parties. They should definitely have a you know definitely a security questionnaire framework that their suppliers have to answer and meet to before you look to partner with them on any technology front. Because as you say, you might have your house in order, but doesn't mean your vendor does. And yeah.
And it's just been forceful with it, I think. Now look, I think it wouldn't be an IT podcast webinar without the customary AI plug.
Of course.
It's got to be done.
Yeah.
Obviously, AI is everywhere. We're seeing it creep into security. Interestingly, on both sides,
Yep.
these some really sophisticated AI driven attacks, whether that's spoofing. We had, I think it was a big construction company, I think it was about a year ago,
Right.
and they spoofed the MD on a Teams call using AI. So he
Yeah.
came on, his voice, the look, everything, and managed to get a large invoice paid
Yeah.
directly to, we took millions of pounds.
Yeah.
And so, we're going to see more and more sophisticated social engineering attacks coming from that sort of AI driven approach. But I think it'd just be good to hear from you around, what are Microsoft doing with AI specifically in their sort of security landscape?
Yeah. So they've definitely integrated Copilot with Defender in terms of, for that SOC analyst role where you're looking at data, large data, where, before you would have to write out Custos queries to get, a specific set of information that you needed from security events, alerts. That's now well in with Copilot where you can type prompts now. So instead of writing out Custos queries, you can ask for information, get information in terms of, what are my top 10 vulnerabilities? It's just a prompt that you can type in, you get that information back. So it's definitely gonna, reduce with the adoption of AI, especially within Defender, it reduces the technical requirement of your, let's say, your junior analysis, where they can get that information just by typing in prompts with AI. So that all that information you have within that Defender platform, you can now start, discussing prompting with AI to get information back and, improving things like building out logic app connectors to auto isolate or auto remediate. So yeah, no, definitely seeing that within Defender and AI.
And it kind of loops back nicely to what we talked about at the beginning, where you have security engineers and you have infrastructure engineers, and they are completely different roles.
Hmm.
But at the security co-pilot, I saw a demo not long ago where you had a SOC analyst, and he said, like the example you said, what are my top vulnerabilities? And it came back and said, oh, you've got these 10 servers, there's a vulnerability, this needs patching.
Yeah.
And using Security Copilot just said, okay, can you use Intune to go and patch these
Yeah.
devices? I said,
Yes.
can you confirm? Click yes. And then it went away and did it. Now, that is the beauty of that integration. But now we have security analysts, and I know that's a really primitive example, but can actually start to delve into the
Yes.
infrastructure side. But then vice versa, your example's great. Sentinel in its early days, it was those Gusto queries,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
you be a programmer to get anything
Of
meaningful
course.
when
Yeah.
outside of just the main dashboards, but actually using Security Copilot as an infrastructure person, you can ask some very straightforward questions and get that data back. So yeah, I think the Security Copilot suite is going to start to evolve,
Yeah.
and just be really useful for organizations. Again, those mid market businesses who don't have huge IT budgets, they don't
Yeah.
have large IT teams. Yes, they might work with an MSP, but actually want to get a bit more involved in the security side, or at least from a visibility perspective,
Yes.
know what's going on. And
Yeah.
Security Copilot kind of unlocks that. I don't think it's the end of the managed SOC as we know it,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it certainly lets customers have a bit more of a co-managed approach.
Yeah. And it allows you to enhance more your security estate where, as you say, you might not have the knowledge to write Kustos queries to do certain things with Security Copilot. You're discussing that with AI. You're getting back the queries to then build and improve your security posture, automating some of your tasks, your security tasks. So yeah, it is definitely a win. Sorry,
So
but
look, we've covered loads today, Devani, but I think final thought, Jerry Springer style. So I'm showing my age here. What's your top three absolute must-haves for organizations? The very basic that you really should be doing, and if you're not, yeah, you need to really think about it.
yeah, I think this one's been discussed all the time, but it's the bog standard one that Microsoft recommends. It's the MFA. Having multi-factor authentication enabled across your cloud estate, it blocks 99.9% of just the general attacks that's out there. And then I think two is still on that MFA conditional base access is to, you know, ensure you're extending that more and looking to bring the devices into that mix, right? So you want to have device-based access where users, access is only permitted to devices that are compliant or registered to your estate because you define what that compliance is. So you make sure that device has got the right security tools. It's feeding information to your security estate. So one, MFA. Two, including that device-based access into that mix. And then three, depending where you are into that, your security journey across the business, is having a SIEM solution because I've seen a lot of times where there's a lot of security tools, events are being fired everywhere. You've got events being fired in, one product, another product, and it's all email alerts. Everything's being sent into emails with a SIEM solution, such as Sentinel. Um, you have that fed one central location where all of that information can be correlated to build out a user lateral journey. And yeah, I think that would be my top three basic recommendations at the moment.
Great. No, I think that makes sense. And look, the MFA one is shocking. How many
Still
organizations
isn't.
that still look, they have MFA, but then there'll be an account for a supplier
That
that
doesn't.
doesn't have it because they're sharing it's
Yeah.
it's real own goals like that cause problems. But then equally, I've had a scenario where an account had been breached, and looking through the logs, it was Sentinel,
Yeah.
actually, and it showed that somebody in another country was able to access this user's account.
Yeah.
And it was like, but they MFA is enabled. How did
Yeah.
they do it? And it transpired that the customer at the time made a decision that they wanted push MFA
Right.
because it was too much of an inconvenience for users to type in a number or use the other methods available. So they had push MFA popped up, fingerprint to
Yeah.
accept.
Yeah.
And the user just accepted it. They're sitting there working. The phone popped up and said there's an MFA problem, and they just so there's always going to be an element of human error. But
Yeah.
your point around conditional access being that additional belt and braces is massive, because yes, it's rare that your MFA will get breached, or there are scenarios where people can get around it. But if it does, you then have
Yes.
another
Exactly.
roadblock to stop it.
Exactly. It's now bringing in, you know, the device into this, right? Where you can't access any of the corporate data or anything at all unless you're coming from a compliant or a registered device. So in that scenario where users might do get social engineered on the MFA front, whether that's a phone call and someone saying, yeah, enter this code in, and they're somewhere across the world, and they get past that MFA, they still can't access because they haven't come from a corporate device. That's so it's about building that extra step, and I think Microsoft has done a really great job in including that into Entra ID and the conditional access, where you can really build out a really layered approach where if the identity get compromised with MFA, nothing can be accessed because essentially you're coming from an unmanaged device.
Absolutely. And look, again, back to end user compute, there's always going to be that BYOD scenario, but even that's catered for, whether it's, managed apps, company portal, whether you use AVD. So if it's BYOD, and again, conditional access can protect all of that. If you're trying to access Office 365 and
Mhm.
it's not via a mobile phone that's been enrolled
Yeah,
or managed app,
yeah,
then you need to use AVD. And
yeah.
actually, if you use AVD and it's not on a corporate device, then we're going to put additional security locks around that. No copy and paste, no clipboard sharing, no printing. So
Mhm.
it's just playing out those different scenarios and having
Exactly.
the appropriate security whilst, frankly, not screwing up the user experience.
Yeah, yeah. Agreed.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you. That was a really good chat. Really enjoyed that.
Me too.
And yeah, much appreciated.
Cheers.
Do